So, why do some people get migraines and others don't? It's estimated that about 15% of people will experience a migraine at some point in their lives. And of that percentage, there is significant variability in how frequent and how intense those migraines will be. But that means that 85% of people will go their entire lives without experiencing a single attack. Now, many migraine specialists and researchers, myself included, think that everyone is capable of experiencing a migraine. Every brain can have a migraine. And we know that lifestyle and environment play a huge role in provoking a migraine attack. But we also know that you can take two people who lead the exact same lifestyle and are exposed to the exact same environmental factors, and one of them will experience migraines and the other won't. So the key difference between one person and the next is their vulnerability to a migraine. So what determines that vulnerability? And more importantly, can we change that? As you can imagine, that is a million or billion or even trillion-dollar question, because the answer lies at the heart of being able to prevent migraines altogether. Because while understanding what causes the symptoms of a migraine can help relieve those symptoms after they've started, understanding why some people get them and others never do in the first place is what allows us to prevent them from happening altogether. And preventing them from happening altogether is the Holy Grail. That's the ultimate goal. It might not be the Holy Grail for pharmaceutical companies because they would lose millions of customers, but it's certainly the Holy Grail for those of us who suffer from migraines. And the way to answer that question is to compare those who do get them with those who don't and see if we can identify important differences. And one of the places where we're discovering significant differences in those with migraines and those without is in the mitochondria. So first things first, what are the mitochondria? As you may or may not recall from your high school biology, mitochondria are a cellular organelle. So there are these tiny little structures inside of every cell, and they are responsible for generating energy. They are where the food that you eat gets transformed into energy that powers your body. The formal term for this is cellular metabolism. So when you hear talk about metabolism, we're specifically referring to the reactions happening inside the mitochondria that generate energy. And of course, these are critically important to life, critically important to the function of the brain. Despite being only 2% of our body weight, our brain uses 20% of our body's energy. And brain cells, or neurons, have more mitochondria than most any other cell in the body in order to meet those extraordinarily high energy demands. So the first evidence of a connection between migraines and the mitochondria came from patients with mitochondrial disorders. So there is a family of rare genetic conditions that specifically impair mitochondrial function. Not surprisingly, those conditions cause a variety of neurological symptoms since the brain has such high energy demands. Interestingly, one of those common symptoms is recurrent migraines. So for example, upwards of 90% of people with a condition known as MELAS experience migraines at some point in their lives, much higher than the general population. So MELAS is an acronym. It stands for mitochondrial encephalopathy, lactic acidosis, and stroke-like episodes. So in addition to migraines, strokes are also more common in those with mitochondrial dysfunction. But these strokes are actually of a different kind than usual. So the typical ischemic stroke is caused by a clot inside a blood vessel in the brain, and that clot disrupts the blood supply to an area of the brain, depriving it of oxygen. Oxygen is a necessary ingredient for the mitochondria to produce energy, and so what happens is the cells can't produce enough energy to meet their needs, and they die due to the disruption of oxygen from the blood clot. So in that case, the mitochondria are perfectly fine. They're working as they should. They're just not getting enough of what they need in order to produce energy, in this case, oxygen. In MELAS, the mitochondrial disorder, however, the issue is that during these attacks, the mitochondrial dysfunction itself is what's causing insufficient energy production, and that's what's causing the cells to die rather than deprivation of oxygen from a clot. So a very plausible explanation is that in both traditional migraines and in migraines that occur with mitochondrial disorders, there is dysfunction in the ability of the mitochondria to produce energy during an attack. And in the case of mitochondrial disorders like MELAS, that disruption in energy is severe enough to cause cell death, whereas in typical migraines, it's not severe enough for that to occur, but severe enough for it to trigger a migraine. So this led to further research on this connection between migraines and the mitochondria, and there have since been several other findings that support that connection. That includes studies using MRI spectroscopy to look directly at brain metabolism, and in those it's been shown that there is impaired energy production both during and between attacks in those who have migraines. One study found a 16% reduction in the levels of ATP in between migraine attacks. So ATP being the molecule produced by the mitochondria. So when we talk about the mitochondria producing energy, what we're referring to is the production of ATP, a molecule that powers the chemical reactions that run our bodies and our brains. Another line of evidence comes from looking at signs of oxidative stress in people with migraines. So one thing that happens when the mitochondria aren't working properly is that they generate more reactive oxygen molecules or free radicals, and those free radicals can damage cells and damage DNA. And it's been shown that people with migraines often have higher levels of reactive oxygen species and lower levels of protective antioxidant molecules that help mitigate the impact of those free radicals. And so resulting in increases in what's known as oxidative stress, which can then further impair mitochondrial function and result in this vicious cycle. So all in all, there are multiple lines of cellular and biochemical evidence that support mitochondrial dysfunction in people with migraines. Further support also comes from looking at many of the common migraine triggers, as most of them have mechanisms by which they could impact the mitochondria. So things like physical stress, sleep deprivation, certain volatile organic compounds found in perfumes, hypoxia, hormonal changes, and alcohol all impact mitochondrial function. So a model that can kind of tie all this together is that migraines appear to be triggered when the brain doesn't have enough energy to meet its needs. So essentially a kind of power shortage in the brain, either because it suddenly needs more energy than usual or because it can't produce enough energy to meet its basic demands, and that would come from mitochondrial dysfunction. This has been referred to as the energy crisis model, referring to the idea that migraines are triggered when there is a crisis of energy homeostasis. And in fact, one group of researchers has hypothesized that migraines are an adaptive response to that energy crisis. So a way of kind of hitting the reset button on the brain in order to bring things back to a more manageable state and restore energy homeostasis. So back to our original question. Why do some people seem to be much more prone to migraines than others? The answer may well be the health and function of their mitochondria. So what does this mean for you? If we suffer from migraines, then understanding this energy crisis model allows us to be even more strategic in our prevention efforts. And in subsequent episodes, we'll dig deeper into various ways in which we can impact our mitochondrial function for the better. If you're one of the lucky ones who doesn't get migraines, then this research might help explain why and what you can do in order to keep it that way. All right, that is all for this episode. So go out there now and slay the beast.